All right. They continue to amaze me with the things that they have in their noggins. And every time I sit down with this group, I am just incredibly awed by their level of knowledge. We are thankful to be hosting today. We are LeadingAge Southeast, and we represent over 80,000 seniors that live in various capacities along their residential journey, and that's everything from independent living, affordable housing, continuing care retirement communities, assisted living, skilled nursing, nursing home. Anywhere a senior can live, we are somehow involved in it. So the purpose of today's discussion is to take you through the beginning part of a step-by-step deal on low-income housing tax credits. The panelists that we have are phenomenal, but before I am not going to introduce them, I'm going to turn the time over to Janet Stringfellow. She is, Janet, what is your title again? President, CEO of?
Yes,
President,
Volunteers of
CEO,
America. Yes.
Volunteers of America, Florida.
Florida.
Since I cannot bring your bio up without showing everyone your bio, she has been with VOA, what, 17, 18 years now?
25 years.
25 years. Like, it's amazing. She never says no. She always has the best attitude about everything. Her level of knowledge is phenomenal. She loves people and it shows. And we're always so grateful for any involvement that she has with our group. And so, I apologize that I can't say more because I can't read it, but Janet is one of my favorite humans. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Janet, and she's going to proceed through the rest of this presentation as a moderator. So thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you, Rhonda. And you're right on. You know, the most important people are our panelists. When she was talking about awe by the level of knowledge, it was not me. It's the guys that you are about to listen from who really master this very tough topic at times. One of the most common questions that I get is why there's not more affordable housing, why providers are not building more. And it is because it takes a very specific level of expertise that we all have developed probably the hard way. And that is the spirit of this training, is to share with you what we have learned probably the hard way, and connect you and enlighten you, hopefully inspire you to do more, because more is needed. So it's an honor to guide this conversation, and we wanted to make it fun. We always joke that there is fun with housing, and there's a way to do it, and we want you to be engaged with that. And so we're going to start with some poll questions that our leadership from LeadingAge will be posting and hopefully providing us with the results. So here's the first question. What type of organization do you represent? Feel free to mark the best one that describe you.
And these are all anonymous, just so everyone knows. So we don't know who is selecting what, so you don't have to be shy on these. All we see is the percentages.
And there's a note that is very interesting, just in case the panelists and the host cannot vote. So this is your vote. Go for it and have fun with it. and then when we're ready, we'll move up to the next question. Well, are we going to show the result of this one first? Let's see.
It'll display them both together, so they have to answer
perfect.
both questions, and then we'll display them.
So second one is, have you previously undertaken an FHFC LIHTC transaction? Single choice. This one is a yes or no question. Just in case you don't know, the FHFC is Florida Housing Finance Corporation. Sometimes we're used to those acronyms, thinking that everybody else is used to them. So just in case.
I'm going to go ahead and end this poll. So get your last call for your selections. And I'm going to end it in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
All right. See. So a big majority are government entities and property managers, followed by developers and consultants. Very interesting. Oh, architect too. We have a good group. And then a big majority hasn't done a Florida Housing Finance Corporation license transaction. So we're glad you're here. Hopefully we can turn this over a little bit to a more yes. All right. So here are the next two questions. Does anyone present on land that might be suitable for an LIHTC development? Yes or no question. So is anyone in this call on land? I'm warning you, if you do, we're going to be chasing you, at least some of us. That's gold. Land is gold. And then number two, does anyone need guidance on finding supportive services for an affordable housing development in their community? Yes or no question.
I'm going to give this one about 10 more seconds and then close it out.
Perfect. Thank you, Rhonda.
All right, last call. 3, 2, 1.
All right. Ta-da. Okay. So we don't have a lot of landowners. Okay, you're spared from a call from me. And then in terms of guidance, finding support services, they're a little bit closer. So we can definitely benefit from conversations that are in. Do not forget that we have a part 3 of this conversation. So we are doing this question so we can continue to cater to your specific needs. So thank you for your participation.
I will put the registration link for part 3 in the chat for anyone who has not already registered for it.
Awesome. All right, so let's move to the next one. So here are our webinar expectations. I have to echo Rhonda's word. I'm very humble every time that we have prepped for this training today, the level of thoughtfulness from the panelists in trying to make sure that the knowledge that they share is the best one for you. It's condensed enough but elaborated that you can get the point, and very caring. It was designed in a very caring way, and we continue to do that. So we did that one, part 1, that was the first part of this series. Today we're doing part 2. And then coming soon on April 10, we'll be sharing with you part 3. So your feedback is highly, highly recommended, because that way we can cater to your needs and to the things that you're curious about or you would like to know more. So I'm sure after this training, we'll send you also a survey, and we continue to inquire that so we can customize it for you. But it is done with a lot of good thinking in terms of what makes sense in the different part of the series, and that hopefully you will be less afraid and more excited about going after a tax credit opportunity in your community. So thank you all. And now this is the moment that I am extra honored, and is to present our panel, which are very committed, dedicated people who have placed a lot of time to this. So we're going to start with Melissa Levy, one of the key partners. I cannot say enough about the Florida Housing Finance Corporation, but you need them. And they need you. I think it's mutual. They're very humble to accept that. So Melissa is the Managing Director of Multifamily Programs for the Florida Housing Finance Corporation. And I have to say, she's very humble about it too. She joined them 7 years ago and currently serves as their Managing Director, where she oversees the allocation of state and federal resources for the development of affordable multifamily rental housing throughout the state. Prior to accepting her current role, she served as the Multifamily Tax Credit Director for Florida Housing. So you know that Melissa knows her things. Melissa has a diverse background in commercial real estate prior to joining Florida Housing. She spent 15 years as a commercial real estate appraiser and loan underwriter in South Florida, during which time she obtained her MAI designation from the Appraisal Institute. So it's very interesting because you can tell that Melissa has been in different part of the sector, and now she's the founder. She's the one that sends you that nice cash as needed. Our next panelist, I met him in a very unique circumstances. but it's the best circumstance as a provider. Someone referring to me as one of the best affordable housing group developers. And sure enough, you'll see why. Darren Smith is the president of Smith and Hensey Affordable Group. He leads the Smith and Hensey Southeast and Midwest operation in all aspects of development, with over 30 low-income housing tax credits development in Florida. Darren has grown Smith and Hensey to one of the top affordable housing development firms in the state. The Smith and Hensey Florida office focuses on development and ownership opportunities, often working to bring its nonprofit and public housing authority partners development visions to life, which is not an easy thing to do. Darren grew up in public housing and therefore is particularly committed to the redevelopment and preservation of public housing sites across the United States. And I think probably of all the amazing things on his bio, that's one, if not the most powerful part of his background, because he understands what is to be there, what is needed, and how to do it. So thank you, Darren, for keep serving and going around to doing, paying it forward. Prior to starting Smith and Hensey, Darren worked in city's municipal securities division and specialized in community reinvestment related business. Our next panelist is Gary Cohen, a very critical one. I said it in the part one, I'm going to repeat it in part two. Gary is the one who keeps us out of jail. Yes, during this tax credit, there are many opportunities for us to go wrong and ended up in a bad deal. So there are attorneys and there are the Garys. Finding an attorney in the tax credit arena is very unique. It's a very special set of skill set. So please, I beg you, do not use any attorney or the one that you typically use for other things. Make sure you find the right one. And I think you have it on Gary. He's a partner in Schatz and Bowen LLP. And he's a member of the Tax and International Law Practice Group, a Martindale Hubble AV rated attorney. Gary has been recognized among the best lawyers in America in tax law numerous times since 2007. And that's the key part in tax law. That's why you need someone like Gary. He focuses on general corporate, business, and tax planning matters and regularly represents real estate and affordable housing development clients. He represents developers in structuring the financing and development of affordable housing. He also regularly interacts with the United States Department of Housing and Urban Development regarding existing properties. And that's another key. Not only he mastered the tax credit part, but he has the relationship of all the key players to make this happen. So that is an extra plus. In addition to representing for-profit clients, Gary represents numerous nonprofit clients in transactions that develop affordable housing for the formerly homeless. He represents syndicators of federal low-income housing tax credit seeking to invest in new construction and rehabilitation projects and assists in resolution of disputes. So Gary is also you all around. He's been in all the different sectors. He can protect you and keep you out of jail in every single one of those areas. Last but not least is a family member, Travis Brown, who happens to be the VP of Housing and Development for Volunteers of America, Florida. I have truly the honor to work with him. He is the one who gives me the scariest moments in my career, which are housing development, affordable housing development. Every time he comes with one, I say yes, and I'm more peachy and happy. And then in the middle of it, I panic. And then I go back to him and I said, why in the world did you convince me to do this? And then we have the ribbon cutting ceremony, and I'm again happy and peachy, and I know we did the right thing. So thanks to Travis, it keeps my leadership skills a challenge and growing. So he is our VP of Housing, where he managed new project development, design, construction, rehabilitation, as well as overseeing the property management of housing and facility operations across the state of Florida. Before joining us, Travis spent over 10 years working in the housing construction field. Since joining Volunteers of America of Florida in 2013, Travis has managed the development of housing projects funded by sources including LIHTC, Home, Hot, Cheap, Sale, and more. So you know Travis have gone through his share of suffering. Volunteers of America, Florida specializes in permanent supported housing, serving Florida's most vulnerable population. One thing I can add, Travis has a master's degree in historic preservation. So he also brings that to the table, trying to do the magic with certain buildings that are hard sometimes to modify into affordable housing and protecting our environment and all the good things. So as I said before, I'm very proud to serve with him and learn a lot with him. So I think we are ready for the action to move in and start talking about the due diligence funding and application process. So I let you enjoy our colleagues and all the great content that they're going to share with you. If you have questions while they're speaking, please write them on the chat box. I'll be keeping an eye on those, and will interject them if time allows as soon as we can.
Great, thank you, Janet. So I'll kick it off. First and foremost, everybody, good morning. It's a pleasure to, one, be on this panel, and two, presenting to you all this morning. This is a part two, as we alluded to. Part one, we covered, and we being this panel, covered effectively LIHTC and tax credits, and what does that mean? Part two, we're taking a step further. We're going into the process and procedures of, okay, so now we know what a credit is. How do we do a deal? How do we analyze the site? What are the steps that are required to be taken from a development perspective, from a funding perspective, from a service perspective, to assure that you're going to develop the best and optimal site? So today we're going to cover that. So first and foremost, what I'm going to cover on this slide really is you have to identify first what's the development. Based on the panel, it was clear to me that there's a lack of land sites available to this audience, but I'm going to cover both land and existing rehabilitation. Okay, and a lot of times you may not know there's land available. A lot of times you may have an existing site that may have a parking lot that you can develop and build structured parking, or may have a vacant parcel adjacent to it, or some land where you can do a redevelopment of that site in terms of a rehabilitation plus new construction, which we have done. But at the end of the day, it all starts out with finding a site. And so as it relates to this audience, you may have an existing site that has a ton of deferred maintenance that needs to be addressed, and you're trying to figure out what are the best ways financially to address the deferred maintenance. You may have a vacant site and you're trying to figure out what's the best way to develop more elderly housing, more affordable housing, so we can manage it, one, to increase to increase our revenues, and two, also add more units to the community for affordable housing purposes. So once you determine your site, the next thing would be really you should hire an architect to do a quick analysis of the site. What can you build on it? So if it's a vacant site, and based on the acreage, based on the use, based on Live Local now, which is something that we'll get into as well, which is very beneficial for the construction of affordable housing in our state, what can you build on this site? Ideally, the optimal site is, from a cost perspective, is let's minimize structured parking. Let's focus on on-grade parking, and hopefully our site's large enough to do that. And if not, we may need parking waivers, which is something you have to address. So once you do that initial zoning analysis of your site, and you have a better understanding of what can be built on it, then the next thing is money, because without the proper funds, you cannot build or renovate affordable housing. And so the best source of money is through Florida Housing Finance Corporation. And there are a multiple myriad of RFAs that Melissa will cover during this presentation that you could apply for, specifically for certain different types of housing. It could be preservation, could be land, could be in different counties. So, you know, you have to really understand that. And we're going to get into how do you better understand that if you have no experience with that. Gary will cover that from a perspective of JV partnerships. Okay. But there are effectively right now, what you should be doing is, one, finding a site, understanding what you can build on it, and then you're going to have to start developing your team so you can conduct all these pre-application activities that we will get into further on in the presentation.
Okay.
Now, poll question number 3, which is, has anyone present taken on a partner or utilized a consultant in a LIHTC transaction? This is a great segue, because we just said that once you do steps 1 and 2, you're going to need to do steps 3, which is you're going to need to build your team. This is part of building your team. So if everyone can please answer this poll question, it would be very helpful for us to direct more information to you throughout this presentation.
I'm going to give you about 10 more seconds to submit your responses before I close this poll.
Thank you. All right, so there
Okay.
is a majority. Yep.
Yeah, so it appears there's almost a 50-50, 60-40 between people who have worked with partners and who have not. Okay, this is great. Let's keep going.
Okay. Thank you, Darren. Travis and I are going to go over the next step of the outline, which is finding a development partner to help you through this very intricate process. By virtue of participating in this panel, I'm going to surmise that a large number of people in the audience haven't done a large volume of these transactions and are in the learning process. As Janet said in the kickoff, this is a super intricate industry. It's very hard to do this by yourself, almost impossible if you haven't done it before. You're going to need a partner, and you're going to need a partner that's experienced. You don't want a partner who's just a market rate developer and has money, but doesn't know how to go through the minefields of affordable housing. You need to team up ideally with somebody that has done affordable transactions before, okay? Once you find that person, and how you find that person, there's a myriad of ways. Florida Housing has a list of developers, and if you go to their website and look and see who's been winning applications, you can see who the developers are. Okay. If you have land that's appropriate for affordable housing development, you're going to be popular and the developers are going to find you. So when you find a development partner, you have to define your relationship with the development partner right away. Because otherwise, if you proceed on a handshake and it's loosey-goosey and you proceed and you win, and then you start talking about what the terms of the deal are going to be between you and the for-profit partner, you've lost all your leverage and you've won and you have to move forward, and you need that experienced person to move forward, and that person is going to have leverage over you and going to dictate terms. So you have no more leverage ever than in the beginning. So let's talk about, you need to enter into a letter of agreement or a memorandum of understanding in order to define the terms. It doesn't have to be a long agreement. It should be somewhere between 4-7 pages, and deal with the primary terms, okay? First and foremost, as we talked about in the last webinar, there's a myriad of application cycles proffered by Florida Housing that you can participate in. You have to apply and win in order for your affordable housing development to move forward. You're not necessarily going to win the first application that you submit. You have to keep applying until you win. The for development guy that you team up with, or woman that you team up with, is going to be fronting the expenses for pulling applications together. They're not going to want just one bite at the apple, and if they don't win, eat their dollars and walk away. They're going to want to be able to try for this more than once. They're going to want at least a year, if not 2 years, if not 3 years of application cycles that you as the landowner agree that you'll throw your land in with them and let them apply. So that goes to the duration of your arrangement, the duration of your memorandum of understanding. The other really important part about the memorandum of understanding is to assign responsibilities for who does what, okay? Since you are fairly new to this and the for-profit developer is very knowledgeable, they're going to be carrying the water on most of the items and taking a lot of the responsibility. And your role is going to be as a veto or consenting partner primarily. They're going to have to get your agreement to do what they propose to do, but they will be taking the lead, okay? Pre-development funding, putting deposits down on real estate, stuff like that, that should probably be their responsibility. when you go into these deals and you get debt financing and equity financing, the people that give you the money want personal guarantees to make sure that they get paid back. That should probably be your for-profit development partner and not necessarily you. You may be expert in supportive services, and you may be representing to your for-profit development partner that I'll bring the services, you bring the money, you get the thing built, and then I'll bring the services and I'll run it, in which case you may have to guarantee that you can deliver the supportive services. You're going to have to select a management company once you win and once you complete. You may have, by virtue of being a supportive services provider, prior experience with management companies that you like, or you may want to manage it yourself, but you have to be certified by Florida Housing and you have to understand what it is to manage affordable housing. So that's kind of what you need in the MOU. Then you need to talk about what the obligations of the parties are going to be if you win. You're going to go into credit underwriting. There's going to be a lot of information. There's going to be a lot of numbers, things like that. And basically, like I said before, they will take the lead there, but you're going to have to consent to all the major decisions. That is, project design, how many units, who the tax credit investor is going to be, who the management company is going to be, who the lender is going to be, who the architect and lawyers are going to be. They can't just jam that stuff down your throat. Your consent is necessary for that kind of stuff. These are all the things that need to be addressed up front and put into a short form memorandum of understanding. It's highly advisable because otherwise, you're in a new relationship with these folks. You don't know each other. You can't just go on a handshake at the start. That's just not a good way of doing business. Travis, you have thoughts here on this?
Yeah, so the group knows, Volunteers America is a nonprofit, so we have that kind of, so when you see kind of my lean tailored responses, it's nonprofit. We are the developer, but our core is support services. So we just happen to be doing development. And then we kind of live in this special needs, homeless kind of RFAs where support services are key. But the goal today is to get you guys excited about, we need more and more affordable housing partnerships put together, especially on the homeless and special needs. It's, usually you have 5 to 10 applications per RFA cycle, and that's not enough. The more that we can have partnerships that are in this arena, the more money that Florida Housing will put towards this, because we all see in all of our communities, how much additional housing and support services are needed for homeless and special needs. So with that saying, we touched on it a little bit about the partnership on our last panel. But since VOA is a nonprofit and a behavioral health care provider, we get a lot of for-profits that come to us that want to co-develop with us or enter a partnership with an MOU. So we have a lot of kind of experience on when they come to us. So a lot of times, in a perfect situation, you would start this partnership a year or so before the RFA cycle. So that you're working through these MOU and all these kind of splits that Gary's talking about, and you get familiar with them well in advance. You start talking to community partners, and you really, a lot of what Gary was saying in the beginning, there's a lot of front end work that has to be done on getting the land prepped and getting it under contract. So I would say a year, but sometimes they come to you and there's only a couple months before the RFA. So just be prepared that might happen. Gary said it, get it in writing, get it in writing, get it in writing. It's very important. It's a lot of work before you have the project. So it's kind of a weird egg, but it's a lot of work ahead of time, but it's very, very important because, like you said, you lose your leverage when you're further into it. And then know the nonprofit's worth. In the special needs homeless world, you have to have a nonprofit applicant. So they have, you really have to be part of their partnership. And then the support services is very difficult to know the community. And you know, I know that there's a lot of talk about the support service guarantee. I mean, a lot of the common split is a lot of maybe 25% of developer fee, 50% of operating between the for-profit and nonprofit. But I would throw in the support services guarantee. Somebody has to guarantee the success of the development is connected to the support service, the operating part of it. So a lot of times I ask the for-profit developer to guarantee that. I mean, as a nonprofit, we work to find support service funders like DCF, the VA, et cetera. But what if those funders don't line up? A lot of time the for-profit developer can give you that guarantee as a partner. But it is very important to pick a good developer. You know, you'll hear this theme throughout a lot of the sections I'm talking. This is a lot of work, and it's a lot of your time. It's a lot of your stress. Pick a good developer. There's no reason why you should be trying to choose somebody that doesn't have proven experience and success. So I think that's pretty much, you know, on support services guarantee. I mean, as a nonprofit, there's usually some type of accreditation that you have to get funding from the government. So I would say that has to be part of the give and take with the for-profit is, look, I'm going to keep my accreditation, and I'm going to prove, come to the table that I have quality support services in return, you know, for the experience that the for-profit developer has. And then on the management side of it, the property management and management agent, VOA is also a property manager. So I can tell you, I mean, the first obvious thing is tax credit experience. I mean, it's a different beast. So Volunteers America lives in more of the smaller development side as well as the tax credit. And we run it as a whole separate department. It's a very different set of accountability. The compliance financial risk is some ways higher with tax credits than HUD. So I know I saw a lot of people on this property management. So I would assume a lot of 202 property management. It's the level of compliance. I mean, you have a whole set of files that are different than your HUD files for compliance for the tenants. So it is a lot higher financial risk and you know, a lot more work. So you definitely need a property management that has experience on the tax credit. But I would also say kind of the economy of scale that you know, you hear a lot about factors into this too, because you know, VOA is statewide. So like you wouldn't want to probably come to somebody that is like a Volunteers America that is not in a city already. Just my recommendation, knowing those local connections and having the ability to have other developments in that city is really goes a long way, because you can share property staff and you know the community players and the referral sources. So I would say definitely that they have a local presence already. And then, you know, Florida Housing puts this as a very high priority on their applications and their scoring, but it also is very important just on the operations, is knowing this target population. So when you apply for this funding on the homeless and special needs categories, RFAs, you're picking a target population. So probably LeadingAge, most of the people listening are looking at senior, but senior can also overlap onto formerly homeless. There's also some disabling conditions like the neurodiversity population, autism, etc. So you really have to have an operating property manager that's worked with this population, so that, you know, and it's things, extra training that comes with those populations, like de-escalation, the shelter referrals, suicide prevention, crisis intervention, increased home inspections. You know, there's unique skills and trainings needed with these subpopulations. And then also you can't ignore, and picking your management company is, money. So it's kind of you're looking, usually it's about 6% of your revenue, can be as much as 9% depending on the size of the development. But you really need to look at this part of it. I love to give examples. So we manage about 1,100 units of tax credit for our parent organization, Volunteers of America. We're the Florida affiliate. And here's a fun example. We've been doing HUD 202 properties, looking at a lot of you on the calls, for 20 years on these properties. And the owner decided to do a bunch of rehabs. What we didn't know is HUD resets the management fee at recapitalization for a LIHTC limited partnership ownership. So our management fees were reset to $48 per unit per month, which eliminated 25% of our increases that we had received. On top of that, we combined two HUD 202s into one, and that put the allowable management fee structure even lower. So we got a 27% reduction in fees, our property management fees, based on this tax credit. So you really need to kind of have an experienced development team that can tell you and see some of these things ahead of time, so that you can then offset with maybe more developer fee or et cetera. So going back to having an experienced developer such as Darren and some of the other guys that have had success, they can see these things ahead of time, so you're not dealing with them mid-transaction.
Two other things very quickly. If you're a nonprofit and you're looking for a for-profit partner, particularly if you're doing supportive services or one of the other targeted populations, the Internal Revenue Code allows you, if you could get the investor to agree, to buy the property at the end of 15 years for a very low amount, a sum equal to the existing mortgages on the property plus $1. That option is below typically the fair market value of the property, and it's a real carrot. So when you're negotiating with your for-profit development partner, make sure that you ask for the nonprofit right of first refusal, which is to say you have the right to buy the property at a discount rate at the end of year 15. It will further your mission. It will take the property off the tax rolls, and it should be the first or second thing that you ask for. The second thing is the for-profit partner is going to bring their counsel in, and he's going to want to run the transaction in terms of negotiating and all the documents, which is fine. But that attorney may not and will not, due to conflicts, be able to represent both you and the for-profit development partner. So you're going to need an attorney, if not to fly spec every document, at least make sure that your interests are represented and guarded in the transaction. With that, I think we can move forward in the outline to Melissa and Darren to talk about the Florida Housing Finance Corporation request for assistance process.
And just a quick comment. I mean, that is very important that Gary just mentioned. I mean, you don't know what you don't know.
Right.
So that who thinks 15 years down the road planning in the beginning? It's very important.
So we have poll question number 4. Has anyone present in this meeting ever submitted an application to FHFC for financing? Yes or no question. Sure, Melissa is going to be paying attention to see who is there. Take notes.
10 more seconds and I'm going to close this one.
All right, so it looks like we've got about 14% who have submitted an application. So we'll kind of go over some of the basics of our cycle and how that works, and give you all some information about where you can get information, how you can access some of our resources, and so really going through what the team has already talked about so far, right? You're identifying the type of development that you're looking at, you're getting your site located, you're completing those pre-application activities, you got your development team together. So it's really important, and you'll want to know and have a good idea of, what funding opportunities at Florida Housing are going to best address the financing needs of the developments that you have in mind. So in the first session that LeadingAge put on, the first panel that we did, we already went over some of what Florida Housing does, and so I won't repeat all of that information, but generally speaking, we run on a cycle, and we try to keep that cycle as consistent as possible, so that you can go back and you can look at our webpage right now and you can see what we did last year and the year before, and they're very consistent, and that gives you a good idea of what you can anticipate for the upcoming years. That's, you'll be able to see what RFAs were offered, how much funding was offered in those RFAs, what demographics we were targeting, what goals we were looking at. And so if you go back and you look at prior years, that's going to give you a good idea of what you can anticipate in the future years. So really the beginning of our cycle, it starts at the beginning of the year. And so we're really just gearing up now for this upcoming cycle. So we generally will have a big RFA workshop. We had it in the end of January this year. Sometimes we have it at the end of December, kind of depending on when our board meetings are. We try to have that meeting around one of our board meetings, and so it really sets the tone for the year. So we're going to talk about any significant changes that we're considering. We'll give a general idea of what we're thinking in terms of timeline, how and when we're going to issue RFAs. If you're interested in the special demographics like homeless, disabling conditions, we generally have a large general workshop that covers those funding sources in late summer, because we'll issue those specialized demographic RFAs later in the fall months. Applications are due in the first quarter of the year. So right beginning of the year, we're looking at general RFA cycle and setting the tone for that. In summer and into fall, we're looking at gearing up for those specialized demographic RFAs. We're always open to feedback from our stakeholders. So when we have those workshops, a lot of times they're sometimes like conversations. We'll take questions during those workshops. So if you're interested in applying in an upcoming cycle, it's really important to begin listening to those workshops from now, because we'll talk about future changes. We'll talk about future changes sometimes, years in advance, because we know that if we want to make a big change, we've got to talk about it, at least a year or maybe sometimes even more before, because stakeholders need time to adjust. They need time to plan. So it's really important for you to sign up our listserv. And so you'll see on the slide there that there's a link. If you go to that link, you can sign up for our listserv. So anytime that we have a workshop, we're going to announce it well in advance. Or if we post a draft RFA that we're looking for feedback on, we're going to post that well in advance. And so if you're signed up for the listserv, you're going to be able to stay up to date on what's going on. You'll be able to sign up for the workshops, as they're announced. And so really it's important that you sign up for that if you're interested in our funding opportunities. So just to kind of give you an idea of some of the funding opportunities that we have our 9% housing credits. We issue those in what we call our 9% geographic RFAs. So we're going to target that funding to elderly and family developments, and that's really based on the needs geographically throughout the state. We'll also offer our 9% housing credits, and we'll pair that with our state apartment incentive loan program, which we term as SAIL, and that SAIL serves as gap funding sources. And those are geared towards our specialized demographic RFAs for that homeless and disabling condition population. Now, we do have our general occupancy SAIL RFA, and again, we're funding family and elderly developments. and we'll pair that funding with bonds and 4% non-competitive tax credits. From there, we do have some smaller RFAs. So for example, we have an RFA that funds preservation developments for the elderly demographic. We have an RFA targeting housing for farm workers and commercial fishing workers. We, got an RFA where we finance smaller permanent supportive housing properties for persons with special needs. And so again, all of those types of RFAs are beginning in the fall months and then into the beginning months of the next year. So we have a lot of opportunities. Some are geared for general occupancy, based on geographic needs in the state. Others are geared more for that specialized demographics. And so really you can find all of that information on our competitive webpage. And so our timeline is a really good place to start. And there is a link there again on the slides where you can go right to the RFA timeline. And that timeline, it lays out all of the RFAs and when we plan on issuing them, all of the timing, all of the amounts that will be awarded in that RFA. So if you're looking to get started, the listserv and the timelines are a really good place to start there. I did also want to mention that we do allocate the bonds and the 4% housing credits. And so we are cap constrained. And so that kind of means, each state has a certain amount of bonds that they get. And so, if you start to reach that amount in terms of what you're allocating out, that's, we term that as cap constrained. And so we're limited in terms of our supply compared to the demand. So right now the non-competitive bond application is closed. And so the reason we do that is we pair those bonds with some of our competitive sources. And so we want to make sure that we have enough bond allocation to utilize with all of our competitive funding resources. And so we weren't able to open it up last year, but if there is bond allocation left over kind of at the end of the cycle, we'll open up that application. If you are able to secure an allocation of bonds from, say like a local HFA, you'd still apply for your 4% housing credits through Florida Housing. So again, lots of opportunity. I'll point you back to those listservs and the RFA timelines, a great place to start. And Darren's gonna kind of take it from here and talk about, how you prepare your application to submit to Florida Housing when you do find an RFA that you're interested in.
Thank you, Melissa. Darren, you might be muted.
Sure. Thank you, Melissa. Fantastic job. A couple more questions I think that before I start that could be helpful for the audience. Melissa, can you just talk about the Florida Housing pre-development program you have for non-for-profits and how maybe the audience could utilize that?
Yes. So yes, like Darren said, we have a pre-development program that's run under our special programs, which is through our policy department. And so that is a program where you can get financing for some of those pre-development activities that take place, right? So you're working with your architect and you're working with, your partners to get all of those, items done to get your application and to get your site ready. And so we do have the pre-development loan program that can assist with those costs. And so I can actually see if I can get a link to that program as well that we can put in the chat. And we have a Catalyst program as well, where they offer assistance for nonprofits who are just entering this space. So we can definitely get some more information on that as well.
Great, thank you, Melissa. I can speak from experience. I've worked with one housing authority that utilized the PDL program, the pre-development loan program. I believe the max funding amount, if everyone's curious, is $500,000, so $500,000.
Yeah,
and
that's
I believe the rate was somewhere around 3%, but Melissa can confirm.
Yeah, I can't remember what the rate is, but I do know that you're right on the amount. It's 500,000, but I'm gonna shoot Randa the link right now so she can put it in the chat and people can check that out.
Fantastic. Another follow-up, Melissa. So based on the polls, it appears that this audience has less land to develop, probably more existing properties, more preservation opportunities. I think it would be helpful to go through what funding opportunities are available at the state level for preservation. So as Melissa alluded, there's a preservation sale RFA. I believe that's to fund one deal. That's an elderly deal, a deal that has to have project-based vouchers or project-based rental assistance on it. It needs to be an RA level 1, which most can get into, but effectively almost all of the units have to be encumbered by a HAP contract. I believe you can win up to $4 million roughly. And again, it's one bite at the apple. I believe one deal wins a year. So I'll stop there. Melissa, anything else you want to cover on that preservation RFA that they need to be aware of?
Yeah, I think you covered it on that. Now you can come in, in the general geographic RFAs for rehabilitation. You have a development that you want to rehab, so that is a development category that you could pursue in those RFAs. Now those RFAs are very, highly competitive. We have a lot of applications in those. The preservation RFA is, a lot smaller pool of applicants that we get. We used to be able to utilize our 4% credit for rehab, but with all of the competitive funding that we have and being able to really utilize that bond allocation with our competitive resources, that has decreased the the availability of that resource for rehabilitation. So yeah.
And I believe there's one more opportunity for this group that has maybe family preservation. In the sale RFA that's coming out, which is the global RFA, there is one goal to fund a preservation deal. Melissa probably can get further into the details. I don't believe there's an RA level, so I don't believe it needs to be subsidized, but Melissa, please confirm. And I believe it's a family. It could be family or elderly.
Yeah, so that is what we are proposing for the sale RFA that's coming up here. And so Darren probably knows that because he listened to our general RFA workshop in January. And so again, that's really where it's important to tune into those, because not every year do we have that goal. And so that's a goal that we are presenting this year. And we're saying, hey, we don't have our 9% housing credit preservation RFA anymore. Our 4% credits are really constrained, because of our bond cap. So, let's look at our sale RFA and see if we can, have a funding goal to do a preservation family development so that we continue to be able to preserve properties as well. We have our elderly RFA. Let's do a family one as well. And so we're always open to public feedback too, right? Like if you have a development that, think would make a really good, policy decision from Florida Housing's perspective to look at, gearing funding towards, we're always open to that public feedback. And so Darren's right, because of those, things that I just mentioned, we're looking at, doing a preservation deal that will be geared towards family development in the sale RFA this year. And so we'll start workshopping that in, early summer. And so if you're interested in that, that's where signing up for that listserv and paying attention to when that sale RFA workshop comes around to tune into that.
Yeah,
Thank you,
Darren,
Melissa. Yeah, and
Florida Housing's really good. Like, don't get discouraged for those listening. Like, if Florida Housing's really good at feedback, so if you don't fit into like one of these exact boxes, Florida Housing can help you down the road and make it fit into something. That they're very good at listening to, and they're a partner. They really do a good job, more than I think some other states, of listening and helping us fit into each project into a funding source.
It's a great point, Travis. And that gets me to my next, if you go back, please, that gets me to the previous slide. That gets me to the final two bullets. When it comes to selecting first and foremost your partner, make sure they have a direct line of communication to Florida Housing. Make sure they can pick up the phone and call Melissa and have conversations and say, hey, Melissa, there's no family pres opportunities available. I think we need to address that. Okay. And so that's going to be very important. And so the timing is the second thing. The RFA timing is posted months in advance. you should have your entire development team in order with your partner in order 6 months before deadline. And I would say that's the latest I would do it, because at the end of the day, if there needs to be conversations with Melissa on how to shape an RFA for next year, that has to happen 12, 18 months in advance. These things take time, okay? Multiple calls. And so you really need to, first and foremost, get your team in order and select that developer that, one, has those direct lines into Florida housing, two, understands all the RFAs inside and out, so they can better suit you in terms of what opportunities are available for you. And then three, have experience submitting an application. Okay, we're gonna get into the next slide where Gary's gonna go into the protests of applications. You need to select a developer that really understands the ins and outs on how to submit a clean application, because there are times when, it happens all the time, where you'll win, but you'll really lose because there's a discrepancy within the application. The last thing I want to cover is non-Florida housing funding sources. Unfortunately, given where we are in our state with insurance, given where we are in the entire country with rates and with construction costs, it has become very hard to close a deal with one additional funding source other than the first mortgage. Very difficult. You need to cobble together as many funding sources as possible. So when determining that partner, and also locally, build those connections with your Board of County Commissioners, with your city commissioners. There's money available all over the state for affordable housing purposes, from ARP, disaster recovery, from Live Local. So make sure that you're in tune with what's available within your city and county, and make sure, more importantly, your development partners in tune and you're actively pursuing those pots of money. That will make the financing opportunities for you more flexible, where you don't have to rely potentially on a 9% credit. You can rely on a 4% credit. Next.
All right,
now
so I'm
Gary and Melissa are going to kind of go ahead. Sorry, I was going to tee it up. Go ahead, Melissa. My apologies.
Thank you, Darren. Yeah, I was going to talk about some, scoring of the application, and then Gary's going to hit on, like what Darren talked about in terms of challenges and litigation after awards. So for RFA scoring, within the applications, we have what you would call like our eligibility threshold items. So for example, you're going to have to tell us the total of number of units in the development. Now, if the RFA says, hey, minimum number of units is 30, you've got to have 30 units at least in your development. And then the application, you submit your application and it says that you've got 25 units. So you would have not met the eligibility requirements of the RFA. And so when our staff is scoring that application, the scorer would probably determine that you haven't met the requirements of the RFA, and then therefore your application would not meet the eligibility requirements. And so you wouldn't even be an eligible application for funding when they go through that funding selection process. And so there's lots of questions like that, right? Like, give us your set aside commitment, give us your unit mix. And so those responses to those questions, they have to meet the RFA requirements in order for your application to be eligible for funding. Then there are items that are going to provide you with points. So points are very important. So when there are opportunities to take an action that will give you points, in order to be competitive in the RFAs, like, you really have to do those things that will get you the points. So for example, if you fill out the application, some of those responses are going to require that you provide us with documentation. Like, you have to provide us with your financing proposals for your construction and your permanent financing sources. So, all of those attachments, all of those documents you would include all together as a PDF attachment, and then that gets uploaded with your application. Now, once you put all your attachments together in one PDF document, if you bookmark that attachment, you'll get 5 points. If you don't bookmark the attachments, you don't get the 5 points. So then those applications that have bookmarked and got the 5 points, they kind of rise above. Another example is a principal disclosure form. So, right, as part of that application process, you have to fill out a principal disclosure form. That's going to tell us all of the principles of the applicant and developer. And there's what we call an advanced review process. And so if you submit that form to us a certain period of time before the application deadline, that gives us the ability to review it and approve it. You know, if there are issues, we're going to give you feedback, tell you what corrections need to be made. And then if it's all good, we approve that form. So if you submit that approved form as part of your application, then you have the opportunity to receive 10 points. So if you don't do all of those little things to get points, you know, it's unlikely that you'll kind of rise to the top and be funded. Now, for the specialized demographic RFAs like homeless or disabling conditions, there are scored narrative sections. So, so applicants, you know, they're going to need to tell us about their operating experience. So, you know, Travis kind of touched on that. We need to know about what type of access the residents are going to have to community-based services, how the development's going to, assist residents and maybe meeting some of their self-sufficiency needs and goals, those types of items. And so there are a maximum number of points that can be earned in each narrative section. And so then there's typically like a minimum threshold of points that you must kind of get in totality for all of the narrative scoring sections to be eligible for funding. Another thing I'll talk about is funding goals. So typically in each RFA, we just talked about, there's going to be a goal to fund a family preservation deal in our sale RFA. So we'll have goals to fund development that meet certain criteria. For example, in our homeless RFA, we might want to fund a development in the Tampa Bay area or in the Central Florida area. In our small, medium county geographic RFA, we have a goal to fund a development near, Sunrail stop. And so, we can kind of keep going on and on, throughout each RFA, but the point is to know what those goals are, because you might have a property that's situated really well to meet one of those funding goals. So again, I mentioned the workshops earlier, and that's why, I'll kind of just hit on it again, that it's really important to attend those, because, through those workshops, we're going to talk about eligibility items so that the expectation before you apply. Our policy folks will be there. They're going to talk about those narrative scoring items and what's really important to include in there. And then we'll definitely go over any funding goals or preferences that we have. So those are all, things to consider, when you're filling out your application. And so I will turn it over to Carrie to talk about, some of the challenges and appeals after the awards are made.
Thanks, Melissa. As to what Melissa was talking about, in the RFA, there's always a couple of pages towards the back which lists in chart form the threshold items that if you do not get correctly, your application will be disqualified. And it's a very easy cross-check. You have to, when you pull your application together and you do a cold review of it before you submit it, you go to that list of must get correct items and make sure that you have them correct. Because if you don't, what will happen is FHFC will preliminarily score your application, and they'll release preliminary scores. At that point, that opens the window for competing applicants to challenge the scoring of your application. For example, if a competitor is in second place and you're in first place, and the competitor feels that Florida Housing has incorrectly scored the first place applicant, he may file an appeal to try to knock out your application so that he can be successful. It can be a bit of a cutthroat situation here, because there's a finite amount of resources and everybody's going for them. And if you don't get funding, you've all your pre-development money and time and effort have gone by the boards, and you don't have anything to show for it. So people pursue their remedies here. There are lawyers who specialize in filing these kinds of appeals. They are administrative law intensive. So just because you get the preliminary award from Florida Housing does not mean that you're the winner. It is not unusual to be challenged at all. What happens is once Florida Housing files their notice of preliminary funding, competitors have a certain amount of days to file a notice of intent to appeal, and then after that, a certain amount of days to file their formal appeal. Once the formal appeal is filed, typically it will go to the Division of Administrative Hearings in Tallahassee before an administrative law judge, who will hear both sides and decide the case and issue a recommended order. And that comes back to Florida Housing who more than 9 times out of 10 accepts the recommended order and accepts the finding of the administrative law judge, either upholding your application as the #1 application or finding that the challenger is correct and that you erred on a threshold item and now you're out of the money and somebody else wins. So if you're in first place and you get notified that somebody's filing an appeal against you and your attorney is not experienced in defending these types of claims, you are going to have to find an attorney to help you defend against these types of claims. You shouldn't panic just because somebody files an appeal against you, because that's very pro forma. People do this all the time because other than the costs of paying their attorney, there's no downside to filing an appeal. You might win, you might be successful. So make sure you've got somebody lined up. Alternatively, if you're in second place and you're 1 point out of the money, you will review the application of that's ranked ahead of you, that if you can leapfrog them, you will get funded. Once again, it would be helpful. Your for-profit developer probably has somebody who can fly spec the competitor's application to see if there's any weaknesses in it. And if you feel there's a significant weakness and it's worth the time and effort, you file an appeal and you follow that process that I just described. Once all appeals are resolved, and they move these appeals very quickly, Florida housing and administrative law judges have been through this dance over and over and over again. 60 days, they'll get this thing done for the most part. So maybe within 90 or 120 days of the finding of preliminary award, it will go final. You'll either hold your spot in #1 or leapfrog somebody and go up from 2 to 1, or alternatively get defunded. And then at that point, you will be invited into credit underwriting and you have won the deal, and then you're off on your adventure, which kind of segues us into the next part of the outline.
And here's our next poll question. Has anyone present previously been awarded financing through a program administered by the Florida Housing Finance Corporation? Yes and no. Let's see. Probably a few more seconds. Oh, wow. Okay. So I'm glad that we're talking about this. And thank you, Gary and Melissa, for navigating us in this part. Appreciate that. Now is what we call Let the Fun Begin, or deal awarded invitation to credit underwriting. This is when we all are happy, celebrating, and then we realize there's a lot of work ahead of us. So let's have fun with this part.
Okay, great. I'll start. So effectively, if you're at this stage, that means you successfully found a JV partner, applied to an RFA, provided a clean application, you went through the protest period if you were protested, and now you've been invited to credit underwriting. And now you're on the clock to close from Florida Housing's perspective. And a lot has to happen for this to occur. Okay, so the goal first and foremost for Florida Housing, when they say credit underwriting, is Florida Housing procures between 3 different third-party companies, a company to come in and to effectively underwrite your deal and to recommend a closing of your deal when the time is correct. And so you're going to work hand in hand with one of these underwriters from the start on. So it's important to do that. In the underwriting invitation, there's typically a myriad of items, 7, 14, and 21-day items that you must provide to Florida Housing. So the scramble is on literally the moment you get the invitation. You have to start working on those items. With that being said, the moment this occurs, the next thing really for you to do is to take that pro forma that you and your partner developed to go into the RFA and to refine it, update it based on market conditions, based on the final award amount that you received, and start to really understand how much money do you have available to build the project and to make the deal profitable. Once that occurs, and the next step really is to start to go to the market and solicit construction loan LOIs, permanent financing LOIs, and equity, low-income housing tax credit LOIs. And you're going to use that model as your base to direct or drive these financial partners to modeling the deal and then submitting to you an LOI. And at that point in time is when Gary comes in and he starts to, and also,
Darren, are you muted?
Something happened with your sound, Aaron.
Darren, your sound dropped off. There you go.
And then make a better determination based on that side-by-side comparison of each LOI. What are the pros and cons? And then how do you normalize between each scenario so that when you submit back, you're truly comparing apples to apples within each LOI.
Right.
Gary, anything else you want to add?
No, it's what'll happen is when you get your final award and you have a viable deal, you're going to become a very popular person at that point. The debt and equity providers are in the business of providing money to affordable housing. They see which deals win. It's public information, and you will get approached by various debt and equity providers offering their money. And then you have to weed out the offers and decide which one's the best. It's not all about lowest interest rate or highest credit price. There are other factors involved. You have to take into consideration the reputations of the various equity providers, who's easier to work with, who's more difficult to work with, who provides more extensive guarantees, who provides less extensive guarantees, things like that. At this point, when you throw in with a specific tax credit investor and a specific debt provider, you've kind of cast your lot. You know, once you start in with these folks, you're in with them all the way through closing. So it's very important that you get this decision correct. You have to it's just like picking a for-profit partner. You have to be comfortable, and there's a lot of intangible aspects that go into deciding who you want to provide the money to the project.
I'll go into the architectural plans. Like everyone's saying, this is the fun part. You actually have a deal. It's not just a dream. You got awarded, you're into credit underwriting. So picking the architect. I mean, you've already probably been working with your architect in your civil, but now you're cutting them loose full bore. So you got to make sure, again, the architect has Florida housing experience. You really want them to have tax credit experience. I'll go into the feature and amenities and the getting ready to closing, but you really need a Florida housing experience, an architect with that. And then make sure you pick a good architect. This is like I've said before, this is a lot of work and a lot of stress and a lot of excitement. You want the end product to be something you can be proud of. So you're spending a lot of time, a lot of years into this. You want a really good architect with really good design. So make sure that you are looking at their past projects and really going to visit them. So when you have your architect hired, you already have your survey, your geotech, your environmental reports completed. And the structural engineers, the mechanical, electrical, plumbing, they will be hired by your architect. The civil sometimes runs outside of the architect if you're old school and separate them. But the phases of the design for the architect. So you're just going to if you're looking at a bird's eye view. Now, this can be a little bit different depending on the type of project, the size, the building, rehab versus new construction. But for the most part, it's similar. So pre-design, that's what we talked about. You've already done the due diligence with them before you've locked up the land. You've looked at the building types, the number of units, the unit mix. And that could be 1 month to 2 years of a time, depending on the level of the site plan approval and the local jurisdiction. But so you're picking whether it's going to be a garden apartment, whether it's going to be a duplex, a quad, a mid-rise, a high-rise. So you're doing that in the pre-design phase of the architect. Then you go to the schematic design. I love this part because you're looking at floor plans, site plans, building elevations. This is where you get, the foam board, where you can have something tangible, where you can go out to your fundraisers and really start getting excited. That can be 2 to 3 months. Then you got your design development phase. That's when all the engineers kind of get involved. That's the nitty gritty. that's 4 to 6 months. You know, it depends again on the specifics of the project. Then you go into, you have something tangible enough to get into the bidding phase. That's when you have something where the GC can pull in his subs and start getting an actual price for you. Now they've already been involved, your GC, probably to give you some initial cost estimates, but this is when they can really put it out to bid and give you a solid number. And then there's the planning cost review. So the underwriter in Florida Housing, they hire a planning cost reviewer to analyze your site and architectural plans side by side your GC contract. So then they will make a recommendation on if they think that this is a viable project and a viable team, sometimes conditional recommendation, but that's really your phases in the underwriting. And then we'll get into a little bit more once we get into prepping for closing.
Great, thank you, Travis. And one more thing on the architect is very important. If you're doing for instance, a renovation deal, make sure you have an architect that has extensive experience in renovations. You know, a lot of times people select an architect for renovation that has extensive experience in new construction, and they don't understand all of the ADA, the Fair Housing, Section 504 rules that need to be adhered to. The other thing is, lastly, make sure your architect has Florida housing experience. They understand their features and amenities requirements that Exhibit B we always reference within the credit underwriting invitation. That's very important because if they don't know the rules in and out that what Florida Housing wants to see, that can derail you in any point in time during construction. It could be derailed in the middle or towards the end. I've seen it happen. So make sure that they're fully familiar with that as well. And the same thing could be said about the general contractor. Make sure the general contractor, if you're doing a rehab, has a lot of rehab experience. If you're doing a rehab with tenants in place, we have to relocate tenants. They have that experience. They understand what has to occur. Same thing with new construction. And then also make sure they have experience on affordable housing projects, specifically ones in Florida with Florida Housing. So they understand the features and the amenities that are required. And then lastly, make sure that they're experienced also or experienced in the area you're developing. You know, if you have a GC in Jacksonville, but you're doing a deal in Miami, well, it's probably not going to work. Miami has a lot of unique aspects as it relates to, you know, construction. So make sure that GC has that experience between Florida Housing, the asset class that you're building, and the geographic area that you're building in.
Yeah, and that's a perfect segue into to what I was going to talk about, because, you know, like multiple people have mentioned here, you know, our RFAs, you know, they all have requirements in them, and some of them are different between the different RFAs. You know, we have different requirements if you're serving homeless population than if you're serving, you know, general occupancy. And then we have our rules. So we have Chapter 6748 of the Florida Administrative Code, and then our non-competitive resources, which would be our bond and our 4% housing credits. Those are governed by Chapter 6728 of the Florida Administrative Code. So it's really important, as you know, we've already kind of mentioned here on this slide, how important it is to know, you know, what those requirements are. You know, same thing with your partners, like Darren was saying, you know, there are features and amenities that are required. There are accessibility requirements that are, you know, more enhanced than you might be used to. We have, you know, visibility features. We have green features. You know, all of these types of things that it's really important to make sure are in your plans from the beginning, and you know, are being implemented. And so when construction inspections are happening, like, we're able to verify that, you know, all those things are in place. You know, when you get into the rules, there are rules about how the deal needs to be underwritten. There are deals that the GC must follow. And so, right, like Florida Housing's relationship is with the applicant. So the applicant really needs to make sure that the general contractor is aware of all of those requirements and that they're following all of those requirements as they're building the development. You know, for example, you know, a GC cannot subcontract more than, you know, 20% of the cost to one subcontractor. And there's like some more nuances about that rule than just that, but just generally speaking, right? And so that's Florida Housing's way of saying, we want to limit the exposure of, any potential collusion in a development. And so if that general contractor ends up subbing out, 35 or 40% of the cost to one subcontractor, and then it gets to us at the end of the deal, that's where you kind of run into problems. At the same time, we know that deals are specific. Like, you're going to run into deals as you're doing your development. You're going to have things come up that you didn't anticipate. And so that's why it's really important to, have that communication with Florida Housing early and often. So if you see something going on with your deal that's like, run afoul of the rules, run afoul of RFA requirements, or just, going to cause you issues in general, it's really important to have those conversations, as that they're happening, rather than at the end when we've got, when it's already done. And so, there are ways for us to, if there is an issue and we say, this is a hardship that the applicant is experiencing, we can, ask the board to waive that requirement. But again, it necessitates communication, very early in the process with Florida Housing. Extensions as well, as you guys sometimes run into to issues, they're, you might not be able to follow the timelines because, things get extended out. Again, we try to take each development on a case-by-case basis, each request on a case-by-case basis, because everyone is, situated differently, whether it's demographically or geographically or, whatever's going on in your area. But there was a point in time where it was really becoming kind of more of the norm rather than the exception in terms of developments needing like extensive time beyond our deadlines to, close their transactions. So we have put in, some things in our RFAs to incentivize developments to bring, more shovel-ready developments in for application. So for example, now in RFAs, you can only submit 3 what we call priority 1 applications. And so that's really to incentivize developers to say, look, these are my best 3 apps. Like, this is the most financially feasible deal. This is, this has the best proximity, all of those types of things. And so before, the developer might submit 10 or 15 apps, and, all of those, probably are not ready to go. So, we've said, hey, give us your 3 best apps, and they should be, more shovel ready. We've also put in a requirement that if a development does not close by their deadline required in the rule, that the principals of those applications would have a reduction, or even, in some cases, a prohibition in being able to submit priority 1 applications in the future. So again, that's a huge incentive that, developers are going to want to bring more shovel-ready deals, because if you can't close in a timely fashion, then that could limit your participation in the future. So again, it kind of goes back to the importance of making sure that, all of these things that we've talked about in this slides of getting things ready, of having your partners ready, of being able to, have partners that are experienced in affordable housing and Florida housing requirements, having those things in place before you apply.
Just a note to let you know that all these great, useful hyperlinks have been posted in the chat box for your convenience. So thank you, Randa, for doing that. You're gonna get probably most of the links that you need to continue this journey.
Great, and just to kind of piggyback off of what Melissa was stating on the 20% provision on subs, on rehab deals, that becomes very hard to not break, specifically as it relates to your painter, general drywaller, and then cleaning. They typically do perform all the same functions. So I can tell you we have had that occur where we go over 20% often. Not often, I would say maybe like 3 times that's happened, and all 3 times it's been a rehab deal where we would have to effectively either go to the board for approval, or we just take it on the chin and we just remove it from developer fee and from basis, because it's not that much that we're talking about. At times worth more than money when it compares to that. But it's something that we're personally working with Florida Housing to increase. I can tell you that. because it becomes very arduous to not break that on a rehab deal. So I'm just going to throw that in there for the group, but also so Melissa's hearing. Okay, so lastly, I discussed previously about the need of using alternative financings, not just from Florida Housing, but from local funds. And typically, the local funds, they want to be the last tranche of money in the deal. They don't want to be the first tranche. They want to be the last tranche. They want to know that, okay, if I give you this, you'll close. Not if I give you this, maybe you close. Now you have to go to Florida Housing and win a very competitive RFA. So the point of time at which you receive committed funds from Florida Housing, that's a great opportunity then to start to leverage local dollars to hopefully win more money, so you can either, one, finalize the financial viability of your deal, or go above and beyond some construction amenities that you currently can't afford because of the limited resources that your deal currently has. We can move on. Okay, so now we're into the pre-construction development phase. This is basically, so you're in underwriting, you're like 4 to 5 months in on underwriting, you're starting to gear towards the closing of the finances, and now you really need to get your deal together 100%, okay? And so the first thing is, you're going to have an overlap of your underwriting. So you have the state underwriter, but then you have the bank underwriter, and you also have the equity underwriter. And the best way to do this is to have the same vendor perform all 3 underwriting reports, okay? And have the same vendor rely on all 3 third-party vendors as well. That's the cleanest, most efficient way to do it, okay? So as it relates to the, and by the way, if you're doing that, that means one vendor is receiving all your numbers for 3 different reports. That assures that there's continuity between all 3 reports as well, which is very, very important. Continuity is very important. We can move on.
Okay, so we're getting even more exciting here on the architect. You've probably already reached this phase, but finalizing architectural plans. The next phase, we talked about some phases earlier, is the construction docs phase. So, you know, this includes the preparing the drawings to be sent to the building permit office. So most of the time, the site plan approval has already been completed or at least submitted substantially before. But when you're looking at the architect, this phase is normally 2 to 5 months. It really depends on the jurisdiction. And I've heard some horror stories of Miami and Texas and some of these other larger cities. And it really also depends on the quality of the plans. But you will need your building permit ready, or actually the building permit in hand and plans approved before you can close. So you've heard a lot of talk about the feature and amenities, and I'll touch on it in this kind of section. So this is why you need a Florida housing, an architect with Florida housing experience, because they can get kind of confused with all these additional regulations, and you really don't want any delays, as you've heard both Melissa and Darren talk about. So in addition to regular building code and ADA standards, you're also talking about the Fair Housing Act. You're also talking about Section 504 and the Rehabilitation Act of 1973. And you're talking about the titles of the American Disabilities Act. So you throw that on top of the building code, and you really need an architect. It's not difficult stuff, but you don't have time for someone to be learning on the job. So the other things that are in these features and amenities are achieving some type of green building certification. I mean, we're getting to the point in everything that we do that if you're not up to speed on green building features, you're missing the boat. It is the future. It's here. It's not the future. It's the present. So you can get Florida Green Building Coalition, the FGBC, Enterprise Green Communities, or the National Green Building Standards. So there's a couple different options, but you really have to get some green features and a certification involved in, at least on the homeless and special needs. It's a mandatory. And your architect will be very familiar with the consultants that you hire for that. And then in addition to that certification, you have very specific things that you have to choose that are green building features. So a lot of times they give you 20 things and you have to pick 10, or sometimes they give you points that you have to meet a minimum. But these are things that your architect and should already be kind of thinking about. It's things like low VOC paint, low flow water fixtures, Energy Star appliances, your water heater and your AC, really they use a lot of electricity. So those should be a certain SEER or energy rated. Trying to think, that's really the main items. But sticking to even your ceiling fans and your lighting fixtures, Energy Star. But we're in the day and age where green building features and universal design is kind of where everyone's going. That's all I got.
Great, thank you, Travis. So, I mean, obtaining zoning, variance approvals, that's basically what Travis was discussing. I mean, you can't get permits finalized until all of your zoning approvals and variances have been signed off on. Your civil works in tandem with the architect to ensure that's going to happen. And that happens really six months. I mean, that process starts 6 to 8 months before you close. Really what needs to happen to close is you need to true and lock down your development budget and your cost pro forma with the underwriter and the banks. And that needs to be locked in. The closing draw needs to be fully vetted. And it's a tedious process depending on how many costs you do have. You can have up to $1 million of costs that now you have to reconcile so that you can get reimbursed those costs back. And on the development side, I would tell you what's also tough is insurance right now. And being able to get that final insurance quote that ties to your underwriting, not easy in the state of Florida right now. And costs are going up, and a lot of times you on the road to 27.5 or 2,700 a door for insurance. Your broker says you're going to do it, you're going to get it, and then at the last minute, 3,000. You have to reset all your numbers. You cut your debt proceeds. So I would tell you on the insurance side, that's probably the most active you need to be up front. You need to make sure those quotes are real. You need to make sure that the quotes don't assume any waivers. They assume any waivers based upon your permanent lender or your investor's insurance requirements. That you're getting those waivers vetted not 2 weeks, 3 weeks before closing, but months before closing. Months. And this day and age, the biggest waiver I would tell you is the deductible. Right now, most insurance carriers can't give you a 5% deductible. They're going to give you 10. And the problem with that means you're going to have to pay more money before your insurance comes in. And the banks, they're going to look at your balance sheet or your partner's balance sheet to make sure that they have that money in place, that they can pay that deductible. And so that's a real issue right now. So insurance is top of the order of angst. And then on the environmental side, this is also done previous to this. So you're doing environmental up front. First of all, you're doing your environmental, a draft environmental, not even draft, a preliminary environmental report for your RFA submission. Secondly, you're going to update that report the moment you start developing your scope of rehab. If you're doing a renovation, you're going to have that phase 1, phase 2, and then any sort of radon, asbestos, lead-based paint, additional surveys done as well, because you want to make sure that your full scope of the rehab entails environmental cleanup if there needs to be environmental cleanup. And depending on you having a project-based rental assistance contract or project-based voucher contract, you have different reports that you have to do for HUD. It could be a Part 58 or a Part 52. And those take time. Specifically, if you're in a flood zone, then there's a 6th step that has to occur after that as well. So environmentals really shouldn't be here. In my opinion, environmental should be right up front with credit underwriting. And by the way, when I reference this,
Darren, I was going to interject a comment. Watch environmental, and I'm with you. I think you need to watch it closely way before this.
100%. And Florida Housing wants to see that. So in their invitation of credit underwriting, there are 7, 14, and 21-day items. The 21-day item is an environmental report that if you don't have, you need to ask for a waiver of it and then give them a definitive timeline on when you're going to produce it. So even Florida Housing's pushing for this. Now we can move on. Closing phase, great. All right, so we're at the end here. We're about to close the deal. About to have an economic event occur.
Yes. It's important to emphasize, even though this outline is presented in sequential fashion, there's incredible amounts of overlap here. The developer is doing everything at the same time. They're finalizing the construction contract. They're finalizing the development cost pro forma numbers. At the same time, they're negotiating the equity and debt documents. They're reading the documents. They're talking to the lawyers. Typically, debt and equity documents, first drafts, are going to come out between 6 and 8 weeks before closing, which is enough time to turn them 2 or 3 times to get to the final document. As the nonprofit partner in the deal, you're not going to be in the lead on this, and you can participate in this process as much or as little as you choose to. I would encourage you to participate as much as possible, because the goal here is to watch and learn, watch the experienced partners, so that you're ultimately able to do this by yourself without having to use a for-profit partner and not having to split developer fee with a for-profit partner. The only way you're going to learn is to read the loan and equity documents right along with your for-profit partner and fully understand them. Okay. The equity documents are voluminous. This is the partnership agreement or the LLC operating agreement, whereby the equity investor comes in as the 99% limited partner or 99% investor member. They give you the money in exchange for the tax credit equity. It's a 100 to 200 page document. And then there are ancillary documents. There's a right of first refusal. There's guarantees. There are a bunch of documents. All told, it's about 300 pages. Each equity investor has their own form of document that they like to use. There's nothing standardized in the industry here. Everybody likes to do it a little bit differently. On the debt side, you're talking frequently about 2 sets of loan documents. You're talking about your construction loan, which is going to get you out from 24 to 36 months from closing. It funds your construction, and it gets you to completion, and it gets you to what you call stabilization, which is where you've rented up for 90 days at 90% occupancy, at which point your permanent loan comes in and takes out your construction loan. Your permanent loan will be a 15-year loan at a fixed rate of interest. Your construction loan will be recourse, meaning if you don't pay it, they can chase you individually for it. Your permanent loan will be non-recourse, meaning if in year 8 the project is in trouble, they can only go against the property and foreclose against the property. They cannot go against anybody for personal guarantees. So as you're chugging down the path towards closing, I'm involved with the debt and equity documents and reading them and giving comments. At the same time, Darren is going like crazy to get the building permits done, to finalize the general contractor contract, to finalize the city or county's review of plans so that you can get building permits. Everybody is juggling a lot of balls at the same time at this point. With that, I'll hand off to Travis and Darren about permits and underwriting reports and things like that.
So yeah, I mean, you're at the final stretch here. I mean, one thing you get your final building permit, but they also want their fees. So that's something that always hits me pretty hard, is the impact, the utility connection, and the building permit fees. I mean, you could go into one county and it be, 5% of your GC contract, and then you can go to some city that's very pro affordable housing and they've waived all of their impact fees. So this is the time where you're at the very end, and it seems like every development I do, it's okay, we're going to get the final building permit next week, and then there's like, oh, there's one more layer of reviewer.
Always.
And we're like, what are you talking about? We've been going back on comments for 5 months. Where you been? And she came out of the woodwork, and she has another comment. And so yeah, this is something that you got to keep your eye on, just like Darren was saying on the insurances. This is always, you think you're a week away and you're really a month away.
The building permit is always driving the final closing date, 99 times out of 100. Everything is oriented so that the moment that the building permit is ready to be pulled, everybody has negotiated and finalized all the other documents, and you can go to closing. But the building permit is always the wild card.
Yeah, I would encourage people on this call and get involved in your local affordable housing kind of planning and committees, because developer incentives are a no-brainer for some of the big cities, but some of the smaller cities and counties, they aren't pro developer. So you could help say, hey, if you're doing a lower AMI, how about you waive or defer the impact fees or utility connection fees.
Good. And then in terms of underwriting for Florida housing, so this whole section kind of been about underwriting and getting to that closing line. And so, obviously underwriting is a requirement at Florida Housing, kind of no matter what funding you're requesting. So, even if you received an allocation of bonds through a local HFA, right, like you would have gotten a full credit underwriting report, when you underwrote those bonds for that HFA. But when you still come into Florida Housing for your 4% credits, will still require an update, to that underwriting. So if you're only getting allocated housing credits from us, so if there's no other loan funding that is originated from Florida Housing Source, then that underwriting report does not need to be approved by the board. But if it has any type of loan funding, so whether it's sale or bonds or home or NHTF funding, the report has to be approved by the board. So to kind of give you an idea of timing of when all that happens. So if you have a sale loan, you're looking at a 12-month time frame from the time that you're invited into underwriting to get that underwriting completed, and then you have another 6 months to close that loan. So that's 18 months or so. If you have a 9% transaction with no other loan funding, then you're typically looking at a 9-month time frame from the issuance of your carryover to get the deal underwritten, credit underwriting completed. And so it'll typically take you 3 months to from the time that you're invited to actually get your carryover. And so I know those are kind of some 9% terms, but generally in that realm as well, you're looking at about 12 months to get your underwriting completed, and your deal moving if there's no sale in the deal. I will also say there is kind of an added level of complexity in terms of timing if you do have a Florida Housing loan in the deal, because again, those have to be approved by the board. So we're generally starting to get our board package ready, even 4 to 6 weeks before that actual board meeting ever occurs. So, for example, we've got a May 10th board meeting. Any draft of credit underwriting report that needs to be on that May agenda, they're due to us on April 1st. And so for, you would have to have all of your diligence to your underwriter even 3 to 4 weeks prior to that, so that they can get, all of that reviewed, go back and forth with you on, anything that they need more information on, and for them to get that report ready. So even though you have that 12-month time frame to get your underwriting completed, you kind of have to take into consideration, what board meeting do you need to get to have that credit underwriting report approved. And then you kind of got to back into, when do you need to have all the documentation to the underwriter in order to meet those submission requirements to get on that month's board agenda. So really depending on the funding source here, at Florida Housing, process is a little bit different, but like I said, all developments, regardless of the funding source, do need to, go through that credit underwriting process and obtain a positive recommendation from the credit underwriter.
Right. And when you're doing a deal that has Florida Housing Finance debt money, or alternatively a bond deal where the credit underwriting report has to be issued before the closing, that credit underwriting report is very much the Bible for the transaction. It is the final set of numbers, and everybody has to adhere to it. It's a 30-page report. It's got 20 pages on the development cost pro forma and descriptions on each line on the development cost pro forma. And you are locked in pretty much to those numbers, and you have to hold those numbers all the way till closing. You get to closing, and the lawyer prepares the closing statement, which basically shows the amount of money coming from the construction lender at closing, the amount of money coming from the equity investor at closing, and if you've got subordinate debt from the local governmental lender, the amount of money they're putting in at closing. Those are your sources. And then you have a fairly prodigious list of uses at closing. because everybody's getting paid at closing, okay? The for-profit developer who's funded $250,000 of pre-development expenses to get to the closing, he will be reimbursed for that $250,000 of expenses at closing. The architect gets paid, the lawyer gets paid, the accountant gets paid, everybody gets paid from the closing draw. And then at that point, you have a closing draw schedule where you put a draw request in every month to get money from the lender and the construction lender and the equity provider to pay for costs of construction as you go. But the closing statement itself, you know, gosh, it can be 1 page, it can be up to 4 or 5 pages. The for-profit developer is in charge of collecting invoices and making sure that everybody gets paid at closing. At closing, you will also get paid a portion of your developer fee. If you're doing a deal, and let's say for argument's sake, you have a $2 million developer fee, you might get paid somewhere between $300,000 and $500,000 of the developer fee at closing. And, you know, the developer fee is 16% of total development costs net of land, 18% if you're a bond deal. And that gets paid not all at closing, because there has to be a carrot there for the developer to do his job and get all the way to stabilization. So they will give him a portion of his developer fee at closing. You as the nonprofit partner are typically splitting that developer fee with the for-profit partner. So if you get a $500,000 developer fee paid at closing and you're getting paid 25% of the developer fee, then you, the nonprofit, are going to receive $125,000 of developer fee at closing. As the nonprofit, you're in it, you know, typically because you're mission driven, but of course you're not working for free. You get a portion of the developer fee. The developer fee is very useful because it allows you to further your nonprofit mission. It pays for all the other stuff that you do, okay? As a nonprofit, you might be raising funds from fundraising and solicitation, but if you're an active housing developer nonprofit, you are going to subsist on developer fees that you make over the years. So it's important that you get paid a portion of your developer fee at closing. I'll hand off to Darren at this point.
Great. I mean, again, we're back to cost pro forma. I've mentioned this twice already. I mentioned it one more time in closing, that, you know, in order to close, you need final sign off on your development budget, on your closing draw, on bond deals, on your source by use for the closing draw and for the development budget. And it's important that this development pro forma is close to accurate as humanly possible. When you get to the cost certification aspect of the deal, Florida Housing will open up the credit underwriting report and compare it with the actuals based on cost certs. And if there are variances, you would need to answer to Florida Housing in terms of why there are variances. But that is the end. That's all I have.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Now you know that I was not kidding when I said you have all the knowledge you need within this great group of panelists. They have suffered through it. They have the actual live experience. So take advantage of that. A few things before we close with the final survey. Do not forget to enroll in the part 3. The beauty of this series is that they're recorded, and you're also going to receive the PDF with the slides to all the participants who were registered. So you can have something to refer to when you embark in this journey. I have to tell you, I'm jealous because I wish we'll have something like this back in the day when we started to embark in this path and have zero experience. So I do believe this is a great way to start to explore and to know who to cap or outreach in case you need help from any of us. I know our panelists are kind enough to get back to you as needed. So now we have the survey that will pop up.
It actually won't pop up until I conclude the webinar.
Okay.
So as soon as I hit end the meeting, it will pop up in everyone's browser. It will take you about 60 seconds to complete it. Please take those 60 seconds. We use them to make improvements. But I do want to thank all of our panelists. Like, amazing. I sat here and was, again, in awe of the way that you all are able to go through this process that can seem so daunting and so complicated, and you break it down in such a way that it makes it feel a little less intimidating. But thank you for taking time out of your schedules to provide this information. And I agree, sign up for part 3 if you all have not so far. And with that, if there's, I don't see any Q&A and I don't see any other chats. Are there any questions? I'll give you a few seconds to put it in the Q&A box. And if I don't see anything in the next few seconds, we will conclude the webinar and hope everyone fills out the survey and has
Oh
a
man, does that
beautiful
mean we
rest of
put
your
them all
day.
to sleep with our presentation?
Evidently.
They're all drooling on their keyboards right now.
Well, thank you everybody for
I
participating.
see one. Hold on, I have
there we go,
one.
good.
Oh, there we go.
Oh, access to the recording. Sure, I can include that. It'll take me some time to let it process behind the scenes. But yeah, we can provide access to it like we did for part 1 as well. So with no other questions, I will conclude. Everyone have a great rest of your day.
Bye-bye, everybody.
Thank you.
Take care. Thank
Thank you
you.
very much.